Hello again, everyone. This is Dave Reynolds from the Peoria Journal-Star Sports Department, welcoming you to another edition of the Journal-Star podcast. Our guest today, head coach of the Bradley University men's soccer team, Jim DeRose. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you for having me. I like being here. It's great.
Yeah. Well, I think your first time on our podcast. So
yeah, one of the recent ones. I think several years ago.
Yeah.
We talked about youth sports with Kirk. And
yeah,
it's good.
Yeah, glad to have you.
Yeah, thank you.
Your season has just begun. You played 2 games last weekend, undefeated so far. Give us just a review of last weekend. Are you pleased with things so far?
Yeah, all things considered, I think we returned a lot of guys in the attacking core, a lot of goal scoring, but very new in our defenders and our goalkeeping. Not necessarily young, but a lot of players that have waited patiently for their time, the redshirt sophomores, redshirt juniors. And we played a very good Gonzaga team on opening night, so we tied 2-2. We had to come back from a goal down, so showed some resiliency. And then certainly with some late heroics against Oral Roberts, scoring a goal with 2 seconds left to win it. It gave us a pretty productive weekend as we get ready to play over at IUPUI versus former assistant coach, Peoria Notre Dame grad Brian Barnett, and then we welcome Princeton on Sunday.
And that's the Danny Dahlquist game, right?
Memorial game. So we're excited to have Princeton come in and joins a long list of some really good soccer programs that have been part of that event.
And you mentioned that game against Oral Roberts. Roman Schindler had quite a day. Got both goals for you. Yeah,
both goals. He was our leading scorer last year from Vienna, Austria, and he's a junior and. He's just got that knack about goal scoring. So he really puts himself in good positions, and I think he'll continue to do those things for us. And he'll rescued us on a day where it was 102 degrees. Everybody knows how hot it was on Sunday. So fortunately, he had a little left in the tank.
Now, how does a guy from Vienna, Austria, wind up at Bradley?
Yeah, it's a great question, but the recruiting now is, we were having a little conversation before about technology, and just it's opened it up. As you know, you follow basketball and look at our men's program, and it's just, there's so many different methods to see players, and with a couple of clicks and some software and some video services, you can see anything. And obviously we're overseas. We had a chance to see him in a couple of showcases, and he actually wound up transferring to us. He went to an NAI school first, but we kind of had the contacts, and it just happens. And we've continued to add some other players, a couple of young men from Germany and England, and it's a crazy world recruiting right now.
And we talked before the season about maybe your main question mark at that point was goalkeeping, and it looks like Albert Reinwart had a good weekend.
He did. He had a really good weekend. I think him and Nathan Wisby are both in that situation. I talked about redshirt juniors type guys, and I think one of the challenges is a great thing for me to have as a coach. You play the 2 games, and now they're competing throughout the week, and that's great. So I think Albert did a really good job on the weekend, and I still think there's going to be challenges. And I think Nathan at some point will get some minutes. And the number one thing is I think our guys have confidence in whoever, and they're both just such great workers, and the players pull for both of them. They're really there to cheer one another on. I know that sounds kind of simple, but they really genuinely want each other to do well, and they don't want to get the job because someone else played poorly.
Is your defense better, or at least early, than you thought it might be?
It's better after 2 games because at least they have some minutes there. Yeah. So this weekend, Alex Ciarmatero is our returning captain. He's played almost every game since he's been here, so he's the one guy. And then Waleed Karat from Richwood High School has just been a player that's been in the program and had some injuries and now found some minutes. And then a couple of other a guy by the name of David Kovakovic, who's the 3rd brother to play in our program, and then obviously John Pelifrone has played some minutes. But we've rotated through a lot of guys, but to say that we were happy with them would be a very true statement. There were some things we got to tighten up and clean up, and I assume it's going to be that way for a while. But right now, I think for the first 6 games, it's just getting minutes under their belt.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your attacking core?
Yeah. I think that's the challenge right now. A good challenge for the coach. We have a lot of good players, and it's trying to figure out that age-old adage in sports and coaching. How do you get your best attacking group or scoring group on the field without sacrificing something on the defensive side of the ball? All of these guys are willing to work on the other side of the ball, so that makes it a challenge for us. But right now, I think we're about 7 deep there. But the guys you mentioned, Roman Schindler, Garrett Wintermeyer from Germany. He's a big, strong forward. And then, we returned the freshman of the year in Eunice Dayak. And then Richard Olson, who missed all of last year with surgery and a groin injury, is a previous conference, all-conference player. And then Frank Bach is another guy who was a freshman of the year and was an all-conference player last year. So I think if we're healthy there, we can continue to roll out some pretty good group. And, we were able to score 4 goals in our first 2 games. So that's, if you can score 2 goals in soccer, that's a good thing.
Sure. And Olson, how's he look so far?
Yeah, we monitor his minutes, keeping him 90-minute soccer game, some overtimes. Played him in those 50, 55, 60-minute role just to get him real minutes, because he hasn't played in meaningful soccer game, I'd probably say in almost a year with the injury. So, but every day, knock wood, he's felt really good in between games and after games. So hopefully the minutes can keep creeping up.
You guys are picked for 4th in the Valley.
Yeah.
Again, it looks like a strong league. I know it's early, but from what you've seen so far in the early games, what have you thought of the league?
Well, you look at it this way. On opening night, Oral Roberts beat Drake at Drake 1-0 in overtime, and 2 days later, Drake went over and beat number 9 in the country, Butler. So right there again, we talk about those types of. Our league has always kind of been known as a giant killer league. I think you're right. It's going to be it'll be a very competitive league. I don't think there is a team this year that is super more talented than anybody else. I think everybody, to some degree, lost something to graduation. It's just who brought more back. So I think 4th is probably fair for us, with losing a professional goalkeeper now, and Brandon Barnes is playing in Richmond, and losing the Jacob Taylors, who played every game of their career, and Clark Emersons, and so on and so forth. So I think we need these games to be ready for later September.
Just looking big picture, you've been, this is your 23rd season as Bradley head coach. You've built such a strong, consistently, good program here, and that's not an easy thing to do. It's sometimes turning a program around can be, I don't want to say easy, but less problematic than trying to sustain it for years and years and years. And you've been able to sustain it. How have you been able to do that? Yeah,
appreciate it very much. We had the year 2 years ago where we won 2 games. And, I've been doing this a long time, and, you figure, at some point it's going to happen. And it happened. And, the hardest thing when that happens is both a blessing and a curse. The blessing is it forces you to reevaluate everything that happened. And that's hard, because there's a natural thought process to just start it all from scratch again. And, is the things we espoused and preached in 2002 the same as you should do in 2017 or 16? And all these things. Kids are different today, and the recruiting is different, and all these. And after we did our deep dive into everything from analytics to video to breakdown, my thought was, as I watched every game, and I know we only won 2, I really thought, that when we lost our games, the other teams were just better than us. And it wasn't because we didn't work hard, and it wasn't because we weren't bought in. It was just, sometimes it just happened. We had injuries, and it's kind of perfect storm. And so when we came back to last year, we just really doubled down on what we are and who we are and what our philosophies and our culture is. And, I give those guys so much credit, because we didn't have like a mass exodus of 5 transfers leaving or 5 transfers in. The guys, I kind of laid out a game plan and a plan, and they embraced it, and we were able to, have the biggest turnaround in Division I last year and get back at it. And I think that's the key, is if for the sustainability, if you don't change philosophies every year, and you don't change cultures, and you stay away from these kids are different today, and if you don't play a perfectly attractive brand of soccer, brand of basketball, I think it's important. But at the same time, college athletics has changed. In our world, just the formation of the Big East, this compilation of a league that brought teams in from 3 other leagues has changed, and most of them are schools just like us, mid-sized privates. That's been a challenge. So that's taken us a little bit to get back into the recruiting with regards to that.
You mentioned metrics, and I think we're bombarded with that word in a lot of the other sports, baseball, basketball in particular. Tell us a little bit about some insight as far as soccer goes. What do you look at in the metrics department?
Yeah, the analytics can be unbelievable. For instance, we have ours, and at the end of each game, 24 hours later, we're going to get a report back, and it's 36 pages. Wow. 36 pages. We can click a button, and I have every single defensive action, offensive action, pass, shot, shape of every player on our team. We have every metric of what we did as a team, what the other people do, and video to go with it. And we all know this. Baseball's obviously the one that is taking the most for everything, criticism, and I guess a lot of people that are living by it. I still think our sport is a little bit more. It's so fluid, and there's no stoppages. For us, we're trying to take what we do. I think this is the challenge, and what we're really trying to do with it is, what are the cultural pieces that you want? What is your team identity? And using the metrics to reaffirm what they are. For instance, for us, without getting too deep into it, we just want to try to sound simple, but we want to have the soccer ball more times in the other person's defensive third, so the last 30 yards of the field, than they have it in ours. And sometimes we don't want to get super, wigged out, if you will, if it gets there one way versus the other. We have to get it there because we have gifted scorers. And if we can't get the ball in those areas, we're not going to score goals. So we might look at that a little bit. Defensively, simple things. How many times are the other team's best players or leading scorers touching the ball? Where are they getting their touches? Well, if they don't get their touches in the last 30 yards, that's generally going to be a good thing for us. So just how each team wants to use their analytics to what their team is. Some of the most misleading statistics in soccer right now, we see it is, if you follow the World Cup, there's, we had 742 connected passes, and we had a 72% completion rate. But the other team beat you, and they only had 300, and it really doesn't matter how well you passed the ball. You didn't score. So it's a little bit like that.
Yeah. Fascinating stuff.
It really is. Yeah. In all sports.
And so you have a service that you subscribe to.
And everybody pretty much does. Yeah. Coach Wardle and I were just talking about it the other day, about how the use in analytics is everything, In basketball, when this person puts the ball down with his left hand off of the dribble, he's a 26% shooter from 12 to 15 feet. But when he puts it on the deck with his right hand from the same area, he is a 42% shooter. So then that might drive what your scouting is. It's not as just ambiguous anymore. Okay, we'll overplay that player, and we have the same types of things, and they have it in baseball, which we see all the time, the shift and everything else.
We were talking about your program and how you've built it. 2007 was, I guess, maybe the zenith when you reached the Elite Eight in the NCAA Tournament. Can Bradley get back to that level again? Yeah, we've been 7 times as the NCAA tournament. We have 7 conference championships. The thing I think that we, the behind the numbers, the things that we hold pretty, I think 4 of our bids were at-large bids. Getting an at-large bid as a mid-major school is perhaps the most difficult thing you can do. Is that harder now in soccer like it is in basketball? Exactly, and we just talked about it. Yeah. I look at, people talk about, scheduling is difficult. But I think there's never enough time in a podcast. There's never enough time in an article to talk about what it is. But if you just think about a couple of things, not every sport sponsors men's soccer. Not every school sponsors men's soccer. So just take the Big Ten, for example. They used to have 7 teams that had soccer. Well, when they added Maryland and Rutgers, they went to 9. Well, that's 18 less non-conference games that those teams are playing. And the formation of the Big East now, as it got bigger, and now they're a 4 or 5 team league, and look at what's happened to the ACC, 14, 15, 16, 2 divisions. All of us are losing every sport, those non-conference big opportunities. So it's really hard to get those at-larges. And I think the challenge as any coach is now with scheduling is, what are you trying to get accomplished? Are you trying to make your team best prepared for your automatic bid through your conference? So
How does that work with your non-conference schedule? For us, it's definitely now geared a little bit more towards the conference, but we still have Wisconsin and Gonzaga. We want to always give ourselves a chance.
Yeah, and Wisconsin, that's a real coup getting them to come to Peoria.
Yeah, exactly. And we talk about this all the time, and you follow other sports. We talk as coaches. Two things that take up a lot of time are recruiting and scheduling, which they should be. But recruiting, everybody knows, but scheduling is the most crazy things. So many times scheduling comes down to nothing that you think it would. It comes down to, he and I know each other through a buddy's wedding, or you come back, or you pull on someone's heartstrings a little bit, like, hey man, remember when you were a mid-major head coach and you were looking for those games, and we'll do a 2-for-1, but will you come here? We really, you'd like to think it's this really high technical, but a lot of times it's just hard work on the phone and seeing a guy out recruiting, and you have lunch together and you grab a hot dog in between games, and that's how the things happen. And
Gonzaga, that's a very good opponent for you guys to have.
Great opponent. We've been out there. They had something coming here, and I think it's important in scheduling though to give your team. I do think, and I think all sports are like this, but soccer in particular, different regions of the country have different styles of play. We don't see a lot of teams like Gonzaga out here. Generally, the Midwest has some gifted teams, but even Indiana, who wins national championships, has a blend of skill but athleticism. We don't generally see the technical skill level throughout a team as much as we do with the West Coast player teams, and that's good for us to see that.
Why do you think that is? Why is it a different region produce different players?
It just sounds simple, but think about just a sport, an outdoor sport. It's just 100% almost just geography. Even though Gonzaga's in the Pacific Northwest, they get a lot of their players from California. So simple math, right? A kid in the Midwest might play just let's call it 40 outdoor games a year. Those kids play outdoor year round. They've never seen in having to play indoor on a basketball court. So more time outdoors, surfaces of fields are generally better. The ball moves on the ground more. So I think that you see those types of development things, and if you extrapolate that from the time a kid's 12 till he's 20 versus it's hundreds more practices, it's hundreds more games. So you'll see a little bit more of that component, where in the Midwest we have a little bit more of an athletic blend with the skill combined.
Okay. Let's move on and talk about Jim DeRose, the person. You're from New Jersey. Grew up a Philadelphia sports team fan. Let's start there with you're growing up, and I know you probably played a lot of sports other than soccer. Just tell me a little bit about your growing up years and as relating to sports.
Yeah, obviously growing up, I grew up about 7 to 10 miles from Center City, Philadelphia, right across the bridge in South Jersey. And just like everybody else, the company that my dad worked for, the company that he worked for, they, had season tickets to a lot of the. So, I mean, I grew up going to everything at the old Spectrum in Veterans Stadium. Flyers, Sixers, Phillies, Eagles. Going to all of those games. By soccer standpoint, I'm very late to the game in soccer. I was, like you said, played all sports, but soccer didn't come to me until I was 13 years old, where other kids were starting at 7. And so just all sports all the time, and I still love it to this day. I mean, if there's a soccer game on, I'll watch it, but I'll have 4 different games going on. I'm going to watch everything. So I think that passion for sports was something that was big in our family, and my mother enjoyed sports. So we just made that a lot of the things that we did, and with that just came to kind of this natural progression to somebody who was going to be involved in it at some capacity. And I didn't grow up thinking I wanted to be a professional soccer player. I was fortunate to do that. I didn't grow up thinking I was going to be a coach, but as most of the time in our lives, our passions lead us to our careers, and that's what it was.
Did you take to soccer right away?
I was fortunate to have some success at it right away, but a lot of my friends played it. And, when you live near a major city, it was great. In our community, the parks and the communities, you go out and there's just a great blend of people playing. We had a Portuguese population, Italian population, Hispanic population, and they were always playing in just parks and pickups just while there's basketball going on in baseball. So where I grew up, a lot of times I hear people say, "Oh, well, I didn't even know soccer existed in the early '80s." And I grew up in an area where it did. And then my parents, my parents were from New York City, Brooklyn, and Queens. So when I went to visit my grandparents, you would see soccer being played. So it wasn't something that was just not, for a lot of people and their families, it wasn't. Of course, my parents never played, but I was exposed to it, so I did enjoy it, and I had a positive view of it.
And you went on and played in college?
Yeah, I went to a small Division III school in Vermont, and then just as things developed for me, like I grew, I got reps, I got games, maybe you walk onto a Division I school, but you never play. I went to a Division III NAIA school, and I pretty much played most of the games, and by the end of my senior year, I was fortunate to play in a Senior Bowl and be an All-American, and then play in the APSL, which was the precursor professional league to Major League Soccer. Okay. So that's where at that time there was really the only league here to be played in. Most of our players played in the States and didn't go abroad.
And speaking of Philadelphia, I can't let this opportunity pass. I know you're excited about what the Phillies are doing these days.
Yeah.
And, you grew up kind of in one of the golden eras for the Phillies with Mike Schmidt and the World Series in 1980.
Yeah. Tug McGraw striking out Willie Wilson to win it, right? And those things. And I grew up with, like you said, Gary Maddox, Bob Boone, Mike Schmidt, Manny Trio, Larry Boas, man, keep going.
Yeah.
And also, too, I grew up in what was the glory days, my 13, 14s, and 15s, the Islanders were dominating, I think, and the Oilers and those guys, but the Flyers were so good. And hockey, I don't know what it is, but hockey in Philadelphia is still enormous, and it always has been. But it was the Eagles, I think in '80, lost in the Super Bowl to the Raiders. Is that right? Was that Jim Plunkett's year?
I believe that's right.
Maybe if memory serves me correct. But those were and of course, the Sixers, then that was when Julius Erving came over, and again in the, I think they won it in '82, but 80, if I'm right, wasn't that the year that Magic Johnson played the post in Game 6 and had like 41 points to beat the Sixers?
Yes.
But those years, and I was fortunate to be at playoff games and to see it on TV and go, and my years might be blending there, but you're right, it was kind of the glory days of Philadelphia, and then it went away for a long time. But then there was, the 90s, and the Phillies won one, and, the Eagles took a little downturn, but the Sixers came back, and so it's a good time right now. The Sixers, the Phillies, obviously the Eagles. I mean, it's a good time now.
Yeah. And you mentioned your wife, Robin.
Yeah.
You have 2 kids.
2 children.
And they're both involved in soccer.
Yeah. My daughter coaches. She's the assistant coach at Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island, the Ivy League. And she's going into her 3rd season there. Went to Knox College and played soccer there. And my son plays at Mercer University and is coached by one of my former assistants who's been there for a better part of a decade now. And, it's a little bit hard. But again, we talked about it. Thankfully, through ESPN Plus and all the different digital networks, I was able to watch my son play this past weekend down in Florida.
Awesome.
And I was able to, my daughter Brown was out playing Pepperdine in Santa Barbara, and I was able to catch some of that. So that fortunately keeps us connected, my wife and I, to be able to watch them on the streams.
And you've established a pretty nice coaching tree.
Yeah,
former assistants who've gone on to good success.
Yeah, it's great. You look around, Jesse Cormier, who went on to take his University of Vermont team to the NCAA Tournament, is now down at Florida Gulf Coast as the head coach. And we just Brad Ruzzo's at Mercer and Brian Barnett's at IUPUI, and a lot of our assistant coaches are in big programs. And it's cool to have them around. And we talk about maybe having one big tournament here where we get everybody back and to do that. And actually, Mercer, where my son is, will be in for our tournament in 2 weekends.
Okay.
So we won't play them, but I'll get a chance to see them play.
Great. And just looking ahead again, we mentioned Danny Dahlquist game on Sunday.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that event.
Yeah, that like I said, it's an annual game that helps raise money for both the Memorial Fund and the Endowed Scholarship Fund. And through the years, we've had just a really who's who of teams that have been here: Notre Dame, Louisville, Michigan State, Northwestern, Creighton. I mean, I could go on. And this year, Princeton's going to be out and playing it, and we're excited about it. And we know that the community supports the event very well. But it's hopefully the weather will be a little more cooperative. It was so hot on Sunday, but yeah, we're looking forward to especially having a new opponent for the match. Probably our first one that wouldn't be a Midwest opponent, so someone new, and it's a different opponent for us too.
That wraps up today's podcast. Thanks, Jim, for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. I really enjoyed it. Have a great day.
And again, if you want to subscribe to the Journal-Star, give us a call, 686-3161. Our guest today, Jim DeRose, head coach, Bradley University. So long for now.
Thank you.